This is AWANI Global with me, Nailah Huda. And this month, AWANI Global will discuss key themes and takeaways from the year 2025, as well as what to expect in the coming year. And in this week's episode, we take a close look at ASEAN, where 2025 has, of course, been a big year for the regional bloc, from navigating tariffs and trade tensions to internal disputes and an 11th member state, of course. But we also want to discuss whether ASEAN has taken another step towards deeper economic integration with advancements in agreements like DEFA and ATIGA and all that. So that's sort of the focus that we have on this week's episode, looking at ASEAN in 2025 and in 2026. And joining us to help us unpack, we have joining us in the studio Dr Julia Roknifard, Senior Lecturer at the School of Law and Governance at Taylor's University. And joining us online, we have Dr Phar Beng, Professor of ASEAN Studies and Director of the Institute of International and ASEAN Studies at the International Islamic University of Malaysia. Thank you so much, Julia and Kim Beng, for joining us on AWANI Global. Of course, familiar faces throughout the year. We've been with you to help us unpack some of these key themes that the regional bloc has seen. Perhaps we can start with Julia. If you had to shortlist and narrow it down to just three of the most influential sort of events and anything that ASEAN has been through this year, what would it be?
Thank you for having me. First and foremost, I would say it's the final member of Southeast Asian region, Timor-Leste, joining ASEAN, the 11th member of ASEAN. And this was a path not devoid of challenges, especially for Timor-Leste itself. And as they said, it's more difficult to get to ASEAN than to heaven. And finally, this happened. And I think everybody in ASEAN welcomed this addition to ASEAN family. We are yet to see how this integration of Timor-Leste into ASEAN will go, because definitely there is an economic gap, and they will need quite a bit of help and training, also financial assistance in order to get on par with other ASEAN members. But I think they would be able to do that if we see interest from the members of ASEAN family to invest and to support the newly acquired member. The second one is, of course, the Thai-Cambodia tensions and escalation that we've seen this year. But once again, we've seen proven ASEAN centrality. As before our eyes, the ceasefire was negotiated, even though later on there were some complications that we're going through right now. Nevertheless, ASEAN addressed the issue at hand quite quickly, despite the attempts of external actors to claim credit. And number three, I guess, economy, trade deals and trade cooperation. And we had the trade deal with China ASEAN, renewed in its version 3.0. And not the least, some agreements reached with the United States on the issue of tariffs, which cannot be seen in a negative light, and I could elaborate on this further later. But these two, the trade deals between ASEAN members and the United States, and between ASEAN as a whole and China in its version 3.0, would be the third event, or the third situation to watch.
Yeah, Timor-Leste, the Thai-Cambodia tensions and the economic trade deals, some of the, of course, bigger issues that ASEAN had to deal with. Dr. Phar, do you agree, or do you have perhaps another three sort of influential events that ASEAN has sort of gone through and managed to navigate this year?
I have my own list of the best three. The first of which is actually what happened in the middle of 2025. Not exactly the middle, but maybe on May 23rd or 24th. That's when ASEAN Gulf Cooperation Council and China had their first economic summit, notwithstanding the fact that some of the monarchs from the Gulf Cooperation countries did not appear, but nonetheless, they sent their defense and foreign minister, with the exception of Qatar, that managed to send the Emir himself to be in Kuala Lumpur. That's one. Secondly, I wouldn't disagree with what Dr. Julia said about the importance of the Thai and Cambodian ceasefire. But having said that, I would also add that in the most intangible manner, it's because there was some degree of willingness by Thailand, especially, to allow Malaysia to serve as a facilitator. That's why the fact that most of the pressure actually came from the United States. Now, this runs in contravention to the norm of non-intervention in ASEAN. So the very fact that we could send an ASEAN observatory team into the border areas where the conflict continued to recur in sporadic format, that in itself is a major breakthrough. And third on the list is actually the very fact that as and when China and the United States were on the verge of a massive trade war, we facilitated the likes of the Deputy Prime Minister of China, He Lifeng, to come into Kuala Lumpur immediately to replace the trade negotiator who couldn't get along with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and that person was Li Changgang. So when you can do that, when ASEAN can actually facilitate an immediate turnover of the trade negotiator and eventually pave the goodwill for President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping to have a peace and very impressive breakthrough in their trade agreement in Busan, South Korea, at the APEC, Asia Pacific Economic Meeting. There is a continuity between ASEAN and APEC in that sense. So those were the three major accomplishments.
And of course, leading the way for ASEAN to navigate these sort of issues and situations is Malaysia as chair of ASEAN. What do you think the extent to which Malaysia has played an effective role as chair of ASEAN this year?
I would definitely agree with that, and maybe to build on what Dr. Kim just said, Malaysia managed to skillfully toe the proper line, the middle line, the kind of a middle path, and stay away from the big power rivalry, or rather diffuse the existing tensions, at least while it was the chairman. On the one hand, it was ready to prove to the United States that it's capable of diversifying its interactions, in particular via facilitating the meetings, the summits like the first ever, the second ASEAN GCC summit and the first ever ASEAN GCC China summit. So it sent a strong signal to the Washington quarters that we are ready to diversify our ties. And maybe there may be criticism that maybe nothing much comes out of it, but the very fact that there is a motion towards that side, in that direction, I think it means a lot for the future. On the other hand, despite a lot of frustration and even anger coming at Donald Trump's administration due to tariffs, we managed to masterfully show him the ASEAN hospitality. And I think there is a longer bet behind this. Probably there is a wise understanding that this policy, the current policy that frustrates people in ASEAN also so much, will not outlast Donald Trump administration, and that is bound to change in a few years' time. And again, on the other hand, we also managed to stay clear from choosing sides and opting for China, for another extreme in this major power rivalry. And we kept at ASEAN to remind China about our concerns vis-a-vis South China Sea. So that was there too. I think Malaysia did pretty well to show it's a neutral player, and at the same time it minds its own interests.
I think based on numerous past interviews with Dr. Kim, he'll probably most likely agree on how Malaysia has performed as chair of ASEAN. But if I were to put on the hat of a devil's advocate here and ask Dr. Kim, looking at Malaysia's performance as chair of ASEAN, if perhaps we were to look at how Malaysia could have potentially improved in certain areas, perhaps looking at, say, the Myanmar conflict, in managing the Thailand-Cambodia border dispute, and also with the US tariffs, I believe there was some criticism, of course, as to how ASEAN struggled to, pose this united front with the US. Do you think there could have been any improvements, Dr. Kim?
The likelihood of an improvement was not strong, but in spite of what I said, I think the Prime Minister, I'm referring to Dr. Sri Anwar Ibrahim, did his level best to have this kind of conversation in the peace. And the conversation was actually rather long because the piece itself weighed 6,000 tons, and the journey from KLIA to KLCC Convention Center was a full 40 minutes from the insider information that I got. So Prime Minister Anwar managed to strike a strong personal bond with President Donald Trump during that 40-minute journey. That having been said, Trump has a very fixed ideological worldview on the importance of tariff, and it was not easy to make him budge in order to reduce it from 24 maybe to the baseline tariff of 10%, which is what Singapore enjoys. So what we eventually got was 19%, in addition to which we also did not get an exemption on our semiconductors agreement. That's why the fact that Malaysia is actually one of the leading providers of semiconductors to the United States itself. In fact, we are the sixth strongest semiconductors supplier in the world. But somehow President Donald Trump was not convinced that it was in the interest of the United States to actually hold Malaysia closer to its chest.
Dr. Julia, I want to go back to what you said about how Malaysia effectively played this role in towing the middle path, not exactly, leaning towards any sides, in particular in the great power rivalry. What potentially complicated this, dynamic, this balancing act that Malaysia had to perform was, of course, the conflict in Gaza, because domestically then Malaysia had to deal with, the protests, the demonstrations, and, Malaysia, I think, also did try its level best to, voice out its concerns about the humanitarian crisis, the genocide in Gaza, internationally at the United Nations and whatnot. How do you think this potentially complicated that situation, and how Malaysia tried to sort of perform this balancing act?
Yeah, right. The Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim spoke on the issue of Gaza on multiple occasions, very energetically. We had whole rallies here, which were attended by so many people. But I also think it was done skillfully, in a sense that he and Malaysia as a whole managed to play the, again, a more neutral role as, in his capacity as ASEAN chairman, and it was dividing between the two. So even when we had the protests ongoing in Kuala Lumpur against President Donald Trump visiting us, the statements were made, and quite rightfully so, that Malaysia is receiving the President of the United States in its capacity as of a chairman of ASEAN, and not anything else. I think it was a kind of an achievement that we still are discussing this in ASEAN. The issue of Gaza has been discussed on multiple platforms behind the closed doors as well, even if we are not seeing some common statement, because, well, it's a difficult topic. Some of the members of ASEAN have quite extensive economic and defense or security ties with Israel, with the state of Israel. So it would be quite hard to persuade them to change the line. And for some in ASEAN, it just seems as a very remote conflict. So we had to balance, and I think Malaysia has done it pretty well. But my take is that still ASEAN, in terms of these discussions, has done much more than some other blocs can claim. And even towards the second half of Malaysian chairmanship, you could see that the discourse even in countries like Singapore started to change. In the political stage, they started to discuss it quite publicly. Maybe we should change the line towards Israel.
Yeah. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about trade and the economy, where we witnessed some progress in agreements and economic frameworks. Like we have the ASEAN Community Vision 2045 that was launched this year. We have the DEFA Digital Economic Framework as well, ATIGA Free Trade or Goods and Trade Agreement, AFIS on semiconductors. Dr. Kim, do you think ASEAN is on the right track towards a deeper economic integration and addressing, one of the biggest concerns to do with ASEAN, market fragmentation?
So if we were to use the gold standards of European Union, for instance, the intra-regional trade is at 67%. They have done well over the last 50 years or more. Now, the same can also be said about the once North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, which also reached an intra-regional trade threshold of at least 67% at its height. Meanwhile, ASEAN from 1970 onwards has always hovered at about 23 to 24% of intra-regional trade. So that leaves a lot of room for expansion and improvement. But as we know, most of the economies in Southeast Asia are very complementary in nature, or very similar in nature. The things that they produce are primarily meant for the American consumer markets. And somehow the chickens have come home to roost, because now ASEAN finds itself completely vulnerable to American pressure. That having been said, in spite of the vulnerabilities that they felt, they tried to enhance their own regional resilience by strengthening each and every document that has been in their dossier for the last 30 years. So what we saw when it comes to ATIGA, when it comes to DEFA, they are not new. They are actually old dossier, old documents, old free trade agreements that have been refreshed. Hence, when you see the lights of ASEAN China 3.0, is actually something that has undergone through a version of 1 and 2. Yeah. So within that context, you see ASEAN trying its level best not to create the wheel, but actually to dig deep into its reserves to strengthen itself regionally, because it's now all about the region assisting and helping you. And top of which, I might say, there was a Merdeka Declaration in and around August 2025, where all the ministers of Home Affairs agreed to get rid of scams that are in Indochina or in different parts of Southeast Asia.
Yeah. Dr. Julia, your thoughts? ASEAN is on its track towards becoming the 4th largest economic bloc in the world. Do you think that with these agreements, it makes ASEAN on the right path, or do you think that they're just blueprints with fancy names?
A little bit of both. Maybe we shouldn't be too confident in what these agreements provide us with. Well, especially if we talk about the ASEAN-China Free Trade Agreement 3.0. Yes, there is expansion on digital trade, cooperation in the area of digital trade and others. However, we also have a disruptive effect of the American tariffs, and yet we do not know how it's going to go. We missed an opportunity to get together as a bloc and call the United States on its bluff with regards to tariff, and instead we chose to negotiate it on a bilateral basis. To me, that was a missed opportunity. I'm not sure that we will see some sort of consolidation in the next year under the next chairman. But also probably we should be shifting focus on not as much self-sufficiency, but kind of aspiring for the idea of strategic autonomy within ASEAN itself, ASEAN as a bloc. And there is a huge potential, but there is also a lot to be done, looking at the internal market, how much we actually trade with each other, not with China. China is our major trading partner for all of us. That's very good. But what are we doing inside of ourselves, inside of the grouping? And what do we produce? And how are we capable of innovating? That is yet to be developed.
You mentioned a little bit about next year, you know, whether this consolidating we'll be able to see next year. But I think overall, what do you think your outlook is for 2026 in ASEAN? Can we expect the regional bloc to build on the sort of momentum that they've had this year?
It's hard to tell. We do not, looking at the history of how succession of ASEAN chairmanship has been going, we are not to expect drastic changes. Yet, under the chairmanship of the Philippines, there might be some tensions and some pressures coming from the United States, since it has Philippines as the major security partner in the region based on the 1951 agreement to take even a stronger stance vis-a-vis China, although the chairman of ASEAN shouldn't be doing it. So on the issue of South China Sea, we could expect that. Probably we should watch what is going to happen between Thailand and Cambodia, if they will be able to resolve the issue. And we can see even now that the appetite for the foreign players to get into that scene is quite high. So we shouldn't give a reason for that. We should try and not provide reasons for that. Also, the conflict in Myanmar, if we're sticking with a 5-point consensus, and probably not much is to be seen there, but you can also a lot of appetite for foreign intervention growing up there, because ASEAN itself is a strategic outpost for the United States in particular. If the conflict in Ukraine winds down and they would like to reorient their focus on China. So ASEAN will prove strategic significance here. So these vulnerable spots like Myanmar, they provide just another reason for foreign intervention. And as Dr. Kim just said, that the huge story that we're watching now with online scan centers, but also according to the recent UNODC report that Myanmar surpassed Afghanistan in production of opium. And that could provide, well, true, that could also provide a pretext for foreign intervention, while ASEAN is not really willing to break its principle of non-interference. And finally, ASEAN will probably have to deal with some level of natural disasters and humanitarian issues, as we are already observing right now due to the weather.
Yeah. Dr. Kim, your outlook for 2026, do you think it'll be another big year for ASEAN next year?
Unfortunately, my outlook is not very pessimistic in light of what happened soon after the summit in Kuala Lumpur. If we were to look at the climatic or seasonal patterns in the past few weeks, it seems that as and when we converge in November, and most of the events are usually, it was an exception to have the ASEAN summit in October, but most of them are usually in the early part of November. If we were to go according to that pattern, there is a huge likelihood that we might be buffeted or confronted with huge natural disasters, such as immense amount of rain, and all of which might actually derail the best plannings that the Philippines might have. In fact, coming back to the role of the Philippines, as early as yesterday, or maybe today, there have been reports coming up from Manila that demonstrations are still ongoing, that a lot of Filipinos are not very happy with the investigation that has been conducted by the Marcos administration, and there are calls for his resignation. So all these signs do not augur well for a president who is expected to emulate all the achievements that have been accomplished by Malaysia or Prime Minister Dato Sri Anwar. So I hope that he can remain in office, because he's a good friend of Malaysia. He's also a good friend of Prime Minister Dato Sri Anwar Ibrahim. And I'm sure that mutual consultation will always be there. But to the degree that the president of the Philippines cannot even remain firm in his own position, and is currently under attack by his own elder sister, Amy Marcos. If his position continues to wobble, then it doesn't augur well for what is to come in 2026, whether there is an issue on South China Sea or not.
I mean, rather unprecedented, I guess. But I think overall, what about some economic issues that we can expect? Tariffs, I think, are still unpredictable. Dr. Kim, what do you think on that front? In terms of the global economy, trade tensions and tariffs, there's still a lot of uncertainty. How do you think ASEAN will fare in this aspect?
Well, in terms of tariff, there is always that aspect that is very incorrigible about President Donald Trump, because he has already said that this is the most beautiful word in the English dictionary. No one should expect President Donald Trump to suddenly have conversion, not unlike the road to Damascus, where he just get rid of tariff and embrace the doctrine and the ethos of free trade. In fact, he mentioned something along the line that the income taxes in the United States can all be replaced by the tariffs that he can collect from the rest of the world. So that's one idea, a strange and funny idea that has been put out by President Donald Trump, which also means that he's extremely ideological, as I mentioned before, on the importance of tariff. So ASEAN and the rest of the world will have to struggle and amber along on the importance of tariff to United States, on the impact of tariff on the rest of the world. In fact, one of the things that we should remember is the simple reality that tariff is inflationary. So whatever tariff that is imposed on the rest of the world is actually having repercussion on the American economy itself. And we are beginning to see that effect as we approach Christmas, and consumer confidence and sentiments in the United States itself are down by a whole lot.
Definitely a lot of uncertainties still to remain in the next year, and definitely a lot to watch out for in ASEAN, with domestically potentially some unprecedented events for the Philippines as it takes over as chair of ASEAN in 2026. Thank you so much, Dr. Kim, and of course Dr. Julia, for joining us. We'll of course stay in touch for the next year as we continue to get your insights on these issues. Thank you so much to our guests today. That is all on AWANI Global this week with me, Nailah Huda. We'll catch you another time.